Evergreen Heart. By Oprian. Chapter 28. Chains of Tyranny. Trixie's mind was in a daze as they dragged her into the hold. The image of Aaron sinking beneath the waves replaying in her mind over and over. It would be a sight forever burned into her memory. They threw her in with the rest of the surviving crew. She barely registered it when they locked the iron manacles around her legs. Only when they snapped a painful iron clamping device of some kind around her horn did her mind return to the present. She let out a small, pained yelp as the device dug into the bony protrusion. A number of griffins were yelling orders to the prisoners. "Sit down. No talking." Each command emphasized by the crack of a short whip. "Get over there with the others. Move." Once the prisoners were secure, the hold opened up, and another griffin with rust-red feathers descended the stairs. He was big, with a jagged scar running across his face, and a piece of his beak was missing. He stared them down with a gaze that could melt steel, and soon even the most unruly of the prisoners fell completely silent. He then spoke in a voice that sounded like he was gargling a mouthful of gravel. "My name is Captain Garrick. I own this here ship. And now I also own you," he said with finality. At his words a nervous murmur went through the prisoners. "You all had best get comfortable as best you can. You're gonna be here a while. Until we get to Coral Cove where we can auction you lot off anyway. Now I'm a reasonable sort. You lot behave, and you will be treated relatively well during our journey. You give us any trouble. The only ones in trouble here are you lot," interrupted a voice among the prisoners, and Trixie was surprised to learn it was her own. Everyone turned to look at her. Most of the prisoners taking a step back. One of the griffins drew back his whip to teach her to keep her mouth shut, but Garrick held him back with a wing. "And what, pray tell, would make you utter such a bold claim, miss?" "Trixie Lulamoon, the great and powerful," she said boldly, slipping into her confident stage persona. She stood tall as she addressed the fearsome griffin. "Well then, Miss Great and Powerful," Garrick said mockingly, "do enlighten us as to why we are the ones in trouble." "Because you were all dumb enough to take Trixie away from her new colt friend. When he returns he's going to kill every last one of you. Unless of course, you all let us go free. Perhaps he can be convinced to spare you." They laughed. They all laughed in her face. "I suppose you were referring to that creature that tried to climb aboard my ship? First of all, what sort of nasty deviant are you to pick such a creature for a mate? Your family must be ashamed of you. Secondly, I hate to break it to you, but he is shark bait. He will be back. He has survived worse than you turkeys can throw at him. And when he returns he will rain down Tartarus upon you all," she said with defiance, his insults making her temper rise. More laughter was her only reply. "You have spirit, lass," the captain said before he leaned close and stared her down. "I enjoy breaking spirited wenches. I also seem to recall you trying to set my ship on fire. Give us any more trouble, and I will have my men strap you over a barrel and whip you until there isn't a single piece of fur left on your back and hind quarters." Trixie gulped, taking a step back. Her confident mask finally slipping. "Your lives as you knew them are over. You best get used to it quick, or things will get real ugly," he said before he turned and marched up the stairs. "Is that all of the surviving crew?" he asked one of the griffins as they exited the hold. "Yes, Captain, plus everything we could salvage on short notice. Should fetch us a nice sack of lucre." "Good, let the dead burn with their ship. We make for Coral Cove," was the last she heard before the door to the hold slammed shut with finality. Trixie slumped to the floor, biting back the tears that threatened to overflow. She would not cry. She had to keep hope. Aaron would come for her. She just knew he would. She had to believe that. Back among the gleaming spires of Canterlot, a very different sort of ship was making ready to set out. This was the Sky Streak. One of a very select number of airships, the single most advanced pieces of magical technology in Equestria. And out of all of them, she was the fastest. On a bench overlooking the air docks, Special Agent Sweetie Drops, better known as Bon Bon to those she counted as her friends, sat overlooking the final preparations. Her mind was still trying to come to grips with the task she had been given, by none other than Celestia herself. "Welcome, my little pony," Celestia had said as Bon Bon entered the throne room. She swallowed nervously. Despite being a seasoned agent, she still got nervous whenever she was brought before the princess directly. "You wished to see me, princess?" "Yes, agent, I have summoned you here for a very important mission. Something I can entrust to you, and you alone." Bon Bon stood up straighter. "I am all ears, your highness. I trust you are familiar with Aaron, the creature of the ever-free forest," Celestia said. "It was not a question. More than I'd like. He did almost kill my mare friend." Bon Bon nodded. "As I recall, he was also instrumental in saving her in the end." "Yes, that is true too," Bon Bon said grudgingly. "I have recently learned that he seems to be struggling with the darker aspect of his powers, and that he may be losing that struggle. If this is so, then he may become a threat, not just to Equestria, but the entire world." Bon Bon's expression hardened. "I see. So what is it you want me to do, princess?" "As we speak, Aaron is traveling to Zebrica, believing there may be a solution there. Which may turn out to be a fool's errand. I want you to track him down, and convince him to return here, so that he can be properly contained until we can find a real solution." "Zebrica is vast, your highness. How am I supposed to track him down? I'm good, but I'm only one pony." "You won't be alone, my little pony. I have made contact with our foreign embassy, and local agents are standing by to help you get started." "I understand, your highness. Time is a critical factor on this, so I have ordered the Sky Street to fly you to Zebrica. If all goes well, you should arrive one day before Aaron does." "I will make ready to leave right away, princess," Bon Bon said as she bowed to leave. "One more thing, agent," Celestia said, her voice turning a deadly serious tone that sent a shiver down Bon Bon's back. "Your highness." Celestia approached her, a small gleaming suitcase held in her magical aura. Bon Bon recognized the logo of the Anti-Monster Organization's research division on the front of the case. Should the unthinkable happen, and Aaron loses control to the monster inside him again, and if it proves impossible to reason with him, in order to preserve lives, you are to use these," Celestia said as she floated the case into Bon Bon's hooves. She opened the case, revealing a small but heavy-duty, fetlock-mounted crossbow. And a trio of gleaming metal crossbow bolts, unlike any she'd ever seen. They had a needle-like tip and a small glass-covered slit along the side that showed a luminescent yellow fluid inside. The outer casing of the bolts was covered in glowing purple runes. "What are these, princess?" "A final solution," she said grimly. "After the attack on Ponyville, Twilight Sparkle obtained a sample of Aaron's core. The source of his power. Based on that sample and her research, the A.M.O's research team developed these. They are designed to completely neutralize Aaron's magic, and deliver a blend of the most potent, alchemically boosted herbicides known to equestrian science. In theory, a single one of these should be able to stop him, permanently." Bon Bon swallowed as she shut the case. The gravity of the situation sinking in. "I'm sure I don't need to point out the amount of trust I place in you by giving you these. As I said, these are to be the last resort in your arsenal. I will not let you down, your highness. You have my word." She shook herself out of her thoughts and stood up. It was time to get on board. She briefly touched her mane to make sure her magic satchel was still tied down securely. While not exactly uncommon or hard to make, most ponies preferred to make use of saddlebags, enchanted with enlarged storage space. But for carrying around large quantities of items covertly, nothing beat a tiny bag leading to a pocket storage dimension that one could conceal in their mane or tail. Even if they were rather expensive. She stepped onto the deck and gave a salute to the Sky Streak's captain. A grey Pegasus with a pale red mane. Let's get underway. Aye ma'am, we'll have you there in no time. The older mare said and gave a wing signal to the docking crew. With a grunt, a dock worker pushed a large lever forward. Clamps that had been holding the Sky Streak secure against the dock released, and the ship drifted backwards and away from Canterlet. With a hum of power the engines began to spin up to full speed. Large rotor blades pushing the ship forward at ever faster speeds. Steady as she goes, lay in a course, east by southeast. We're heading for Zebrica. Time passed torturously slow for the prisoners. The hold was unbearably hot during the day, and cold during the night, forcing them to huddle against each other for warmth. Their meals consisted of cold gruel and stale bread. Barely enough to keep their strength up. The mood was miserable among the survivors, not just because of their bleak-looking future, but also because of friends lost. Among the dead was Captain Seaspray. The news of the captain's death hit Trixie hard. Though she had only known the old pony for a brief time, she owed him a lot, not just for helping Aaron, but also for getting the two of them together at last. And now she couldn't even say thank you anymore. As the days dragged on, her mood fell further and further. With nothing to do but sit quietly, and the constant pain of the horn restraint, she was left with little but her own thoughts. Try as she might, she couldn't get the iron device to budge. In fact, the harder she tried the harder it bit into her horn, until it became too agonizing to continue. The constant headache it gave her made it difficult to sleep, and the days passed in a tired blur. All she could think about during her waking moments was the sight of Aaron sinking beneath the waves. She kept telling herself that he was alive. That he was definitely coming for her. But after 6 days in the cramped hold, a part of her began to doubt. What if he really was dead and gone? Or what if he was still alive, yet forever trapped at the bottom of the sea? What if they never saw each other again? The world was a big place after all. And finding one pony would prove to be a nigh impossible task. Even though doubt and worry slowly filled her heart, Trixie never let it show. When they brought the prisoners food, she stood tall and proud. When they made lewd comments about all the things they could do to her, she stood unbowed and unflinching. When they taunted her, she bit her tongue and let their words pass over her. Because she knew her mouth would get her in trouble. Now was not the time. She would wait. She would weigh her chances, and when the time was right, she would act. On the morning of their 7th day into the journey, a cry rang out across the ship. Land ho! By mid-morning the ship passed into a very busy harbour town. Not exactly a place one would expect a pirate vessel to be welcomed. But the port authorities treated it like business as usual. The town's architecture was an odd mix of various styles. Some buildings were made of wood. Others of cheap imported brickwork, and some of packed clay and sandstone. Even though it was still relatively early, the heat was already on the rise. One by one the prisoners were led out of the hold and chained together in a long line with iron collars around their necks. Then, as one, they were led off the ship. As they passed by a group of zebra guards, one stallion in the line tried to run over and get their attention. "Please, help us," he shouted. "They attacked our ship." As he reached the group of guards, however, one pulled out a short cudgel and whacked the stallion hard across the shoulder. The pony went down with a cry of pain. "Keep your property under control," the guard said to the griffins that rushed up to the pony and dragged him back in line. "Don't worry, this one won't be any more trouble," one of the griffins growled. The entire group was led over to a large, barn-like building of clay and sandstone. The majority of its interior was taken up by cells that looked more like stables. A pair of doors on the far side led to a market square with a small auction stage. Another set of smaller doors off to the side led to a small chamber with a forge. Trixie shuddered when she cast a glance through those doors, and saw branding irons hanging from a rack, while others were put into the forge fire in preparation. One by one each prisoner was given a quick and rough scrub down with a bucket of cold water to make them look somewhat presentable. Their claws were anything but gentle as they groped and scrubbed Trixie, even under her tail. Fortunately the whole procedure was relatively brief. Then they were led out the door and lined up behind the stage. Trixie shivered slightly as the last of the cold water evaporated under the mid-morning sun, leaving her coat feeling rough without a proper brushing. A crowd began to gather in the square. A lot of them were zebra. And to Trixie's surprise there seemed to be two distinct kinds of zebra. There were those who looked most like Zecora, with coats in various shades of grey, and a slightly smaller breed of zebra with coats that had more beige tones to them. Almost all of them had at least one or more golden rings around either their neck or a limb. The second most common creatures in the crowd by far were wildebeests. Then there was your typical sprinkle of exotic faces like griffins, a minotaur or two, who didn't stand out so much among the wildebeest with their big horns. There was even a pair of rhinos in the crowd, who towered over everyone present. After a few more minutes of waiting, a tall, gangly diamond dog walked up the stage. He wore a ratty top hat and what looked like a saddle Arabian vest of faded green color. When he spoke, Trixie was surprised by how articulate he was. Most diamond dogs weren't particularly well spoken. "Good morning. Ladies and gentle creatures, beings of all ages, step right up and take a gander at what we have here for you this fine morning. Fresh off the boat we have some exotic equestrian meat for you. Keep your lucre ready because we're starting this auction, right now." As he said so, the first prisoner in line was pulled up on the stage. "Yes, ladies and gentle creatures, our first specimen is a fine young stallion. Perfect for menial labor or domestic work. He's 100% intact too," said the dog as he yanked up the stallion's tail. "Though if you worry about your daughters we can always make him a gelding after purchase for only a minimal additional fee." Every other stallion in the line blanched at that last declaration, clamping their hind legs together tightly. "Let's start the bidding at 50 lucre. Yes, you there sir," he motioned to a zebra stallion who raised a hoof. "I bid 55. Said a wildebeest, holding up a coin purse. 55 on offer, do I hear 60 lucre? Surely a handsome young stallion is worth that much," said the dog. Another zebra raised a hoof. "Excellent," said the dog. "Any being offering 65. No one raised a hoof. Sold. To the lovely lady. Would you like him as is or gelded?" "I shall take him as is," said the zebra mare with a calculative smirk. The poor stallion let out a shuddering breath and thanked Celestia for sparing him at least that horror. "Excellent, just follow my associate inside and we will have him branded with your mark of ownership." The whimpering stallion was dragged inside by two griffins, his new owner following just behind. The auction continued with the next pony in line. The bidding was briefly interrupted by a drawn-out scream from inside as the newly sold slave received his mark, but otherwise continued unabated. Many a pony was sold off to various zebra and wildebeest. The rhinos turned out to be prospectors, who bought all three of the crew's surviving diamond dogs to work in their gem mines. 2 mares were sold to a rich lord's estate to work as maidservants. The crew's Pegasi were in high demand since their weather-manipulating ability made them perfect as farm hands in the arid climate. Finally it was Trixie's turn on the block. "Next we have an exotic unicorn mare. Look at that fine blue coat, those shapely flanks. She would make a great bed warmer for any male, or female," the dog said with a lewd wink at the crowd. "And she can be all yours right now. Let's start the bidding at 100 lucre." Bidding went up quite quickly, going up to nearly 500 lucre. Apparently her blue coat and mane proved very popular. 550. Roared a big burly wildebeest. 550 offered by the owner of the local brothel. "Good to see you again sir, always happy with your patronage." "Going once, going twice." 1000. Said a voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to look at the newcomer. He was an unremarkable zebra wearing a traveling cloak to ward off the sun's glare. "Who are you to butt in like that?" demanded the wildebeest. In reply, the cloaked pony walked over and whispered something into his ear. The wildebeest paled and slunk back, mumbling reparations. "Well then, are there any other bids?" the dog asked, getting things back on track. "No. Sold to the cloaked stranger. Just follow my associates inside and we will have her branded right away, good sir." Two griffins stepped up to take hold of her chains, and Trixie felt her heart racing as panic gripped her. She cast a fearful glance at the doors. She could still hear the screams of the last Pegasus coming from inside. "There won't be any need. My master prefers to do his own branding." "As you wish. Should you wish to buy any more, we can have her locked in a pen until you are finished." "That would be appreciated." Trixie was marched inside and locked in one of the rusty iron pens. Unfortunately, being inside made the screaming all the more audible. Soon enough another pony was dragged past her cage and into the side room. "No. No, please, please. No, no, don't. Trixie clamped her hooves over her ears and closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound. The smell of burned fur and flesh reached her nose and made her retch. When she finally dared to open her eyes again, she saw the pony being led away from the room. His face a mess of tears and walking with a limp. The black outline of a strange sigil burned into his flanks, right over his cutie mark. As they passed by her pen, the stench of burned flesh overpowered everything. Her stomach gave a lurch and she ran to the furthest corner of the pen, where she finally lost her meager breakfast. Not long after, a couple more ponies joined her in the pen. A trio of stallions and 2 mares. All of them bought by the same mysterious master. At least they were spared the horror of the branding iron, for now. Who knew what other terrors lay in store for them? Finally the auction ended and those gathered in the square began to disperse, while those who had bought slaves came to collect them. The mysterious cloaked zebra came up to their pen and motioned for the griffin to open the door. As the griffins chained them all together, the zebra spoke. "You all have the privilege of being chosen by our master to work for him. When you are given an order, you will obey swiftly and without hesitation. Try to run, you will be punished. And for you unicorns, casting spells is forbidden, unless you are specifically told to do so. We catch you doing so without orders, we chop off your horn, and you can spend the year or so it takes to regrow doing hard labor. The second time we catch you, we chop it off again, only this time we will cauterize the wound with a hot iron, and your horn will never regrow. The same goes for you Pegasi. You fly without permission, we clip your wings. Second time, we amputate them. Not if you understood." All of them nodded swiftly, and the iron devices were finally removed from the unicorn's horns. Trixie let out a sigh of relief as the painful device was lifted off. Her horn still throbbed, but it no longer felt like some pony was trying to drive a shard of glass into her skull. "Good. Now fall in line and follow me. We have a 4-day walk ahead of us." Thus the group began their long trek. They marched straight up to the town gate where a small armed group of zebra waited. The slaves were then made to carry heavy bags filled with water and supplies. Afterwards the real walk began. The armed group taking up flanking positions as they walked. The road ahead was long, and the heat was stifling. Trixie stoically kept pace. Used to walking long distances while dragging her cart. By comparison the saddlebags weren't all that heavy. She only wished she still had her hat to keep the sun out of her eyes. But all her possessions had been taken. Likely to be pawned off for a few bits, or lucre in this case. Not all of the group fared as well. Unused to trekking long distances, coupled with the scorching sun, some grew tired quickly and began to lose pace with the others. When one of the stallions stumbled, he was immediately told to get back on his hooves and keep walking. When he did not manage to comply swiftly enough, the whips came out. raining blows upon him until he managed to hoist himself up and get back in line. Trixie didn't know why, but it was as if their handlers were trying to make the trip much harder than it needed to be. As if they were trying to break them. Realization dawned on her. They were trying to break their spirits. She might not be an expert on psychology, but Trixie was smart enough to figure out their intentions. They were trying to make the trip as unpleasant as possible and break their spirits to quell any remaining sparks of rebellion. Not today, thought Trixie. She would play along. She would be the humble and subservient Trixie, for as long as it took for them to lower their guard. At sunset they made camp. Most of their escort spread out to form a rudimentary perimeter around their campsite, leaving just 2 zebra to watch over them. Their mysterious cloaked leader was nowhere in sight. They were given cold watery soup while their captors feasted on fresh fruit. Her fellow captives eyed the fruit hungrily as they finished their small bowls of food. The mare next to her whimpered as she watched one of the zebra bite into a plump peach, her stomach rumbling audibly. As she felt her own belly rumble in sympathy, Trixie decided to act. She got to her hooves and slowly walked over to the stallions and their big bowl of fruit. "Sirs," she said in her most obeisant voice. "May we please have some fruit?" "No," came the curt reply. "Please sirs, we walked all day, we need some energy if we are to keep up the pace tomorrow." She kept her stature low and meek. "What part of no do you not understand, slave?" The other one spit at her. "Get back with the others before I take my whip to you." Trixie bowed low. "Why yes sirs." "As you command," she stammered before slinking back to her spot with the other slaves. "Worms," the stallion muttered before he turned his back to them. His comrade following suit. They both failed to see Trixie's smirk as she walked away. As she sat back down in her spot she poked the mare next to her. "Shh, pass this along," she whispered as she pulled a trio of peaches from her mane. The mare's eyes went wide as she looked at the shiny fruit. "How did you? You didn't cast a spell, did you? If they find out..." "Trixie doesn't need magic to get one over on these fools," she whispered with satisfaction. No, Trixie didn't need to use real magic for this. Just good old sleight of hoof. The basics for any stage magician. Silently they divided the peaches into halves and ate them swiftly. Their journey continued the next morning, their pace just as grueling as the day before. Even Trixie found it hard to keep up. Having only had soup and half a peach to eat meant her energy reserves were really low, and the scorching sun was relentless. Around noon they passed a small oasis. When given leave to drink, the captives nearly threw themselves into the water in their rush to slake their thirst. From there their journey continued across the savanna-like landscape towards distant mountains. They crossed a small trading town that now served as a slavers' outpost. Forcing the townspeople to work for them and pay tribute lest they be dragged off in chains. They only stopped in town long enough to take on some additional supplies, making the bags they were forced to carry even heavier. By nightfall the town had vanished beyond the horizon. And when they finally made camp all the slaves collapsed with exhaustion. Even Trixie didn't have the energy left to do more than gulp down the gruel they fed her before an exhausted sleep claimed her. Halfway through their third day on the dusty road one of the other mares collapsed. The harsh conditions and lack of proper food finally taking its toll. She lay in the dirt, panting with exhaustion and thirst. "Get up," one of their captors shouted. "I said on your hooves, slave. I can't. Please, just need some water and 5 minutes rest. I told you to get up, so get up." The stallion roared as he brought his whip down. The mare shrieked as the instrument made contact with her back. "Move. I can't," she cried as she crawled along the ground. "You will do as you're told." Just as he brought his whip down again, Trixie positioned herself between him and the fallen mare. The whip bit into her side, hard enough to rip away some of her coat hair, leaving an angry bare welt. She yelped in pain but stood her ground. "Enough. She needs a break, we all do." If you keep this up you'll kill her. You dare raise your voice against your betters? We shall have to teach you a lesson. The whip struck her again, several others joining in as the other guards ganged up on her. Trixie tried to shield herself, to dodge out of the way. But no matter which way she spun or jumped, one of the whips would find its mark. They struck her everywhere without care, the only place they avoided being her face so they wouldn't accidentally take out an eye. Their lord and master would be displeased if they presented him with damaged goods. Whip marks however didn't count to that effect. The savage beating continued in a gruesome symphony of whip cracks and Trixie's yelps of pain. Until finally the fallen mare she had tried to protect threw herself at the hoof of the lead guard. Please. Please stop, I'll walk. Just don't hit her anymore. She cried out, clinging to the stallion's leg. He held up a hoof to forestall his men and turned to address the girl at his hooves. And what's in it for me? The mare looked up uncertainly. What do you want? The guard gave her a lewd grin that made her pale, and licked his lips. And no, not that, please, not that. Keep an eye on the others, he barked to his men. I have business with this one. He began to drag the whimpering mare off to some bushes for some privacy, but was stopped halfway by the cloaked stallion. The master does not allow this. Cease this action at once. The master doesn't need to know. He said and began to push past him. I speak with the master's authority, and I gave you a command. I'm not one of your slaves. You can stick your command up your plot. He said with a sneer and resumed his way, dragging the weeping girl along. Before he could make it to the bushes with her, a knife erupted from his throat. The cloaked stallion had moved up behind him before he even noticed and shoved it through the back of his neck. He pawed weakly at his throat before he collapsed. I'd rather stick my knife in you. He said dryly before pulling the weapon back out, wiping the blood on the dead stallion's coat. The mare scrambled away from the guard's corpse. Eyes wide and fearful. Get the other girl and get her back in line with the others. You have 10 minutes before we move out again. The cloaked zebra told her in that same emotionless voice that brooked no disobedience. She hurried to comply. He then turned to address the remainder of their guard escort. Your leader made a very poor choice. He chose to ignore the word of the master. The master expects his slaves to arrive untarnished. Fail this task, and you will be lucky if killing you is all he does. As the other guards began to strip the corpse of their former leader of its gear, the mare gently helped Trixie back to her hooves. Thank you, for trying to help me, she whispered to Trixie, who gave her a pained little smile in return. The last leg of their journey that day was slow going. Trixie limped along with each step, her body so very sore, and covered in welts. The other mare didn't move from her side, supporting her as best she could. They spent the night on a large farm that belonged to their mysterious master. They slept in the barn and were allowed a proper meal for the first time since they were taken from the ship. It was a simple meal of fruits and hard vegetables. But to their starving bodies it was a king's feast. The last day of their journey passed without incidents, since every pony was able to more or less keep pace that day. By noon they came to the edge of a dense jungle. A small but well-kept path wound through the trees and bushes, barely wide enough to allow a cart through. They followed this path into the jungle proper until twilight set in. Just as Trixie feared they would be stuck trudging through the treacherous terrain in the dark, the path ahead opened up to reveal a large compound in an artificial clearing. The trees here had been cut away to make room for around a dozen buildings. The entire site was surrounded by a palisade, forming a rough circle around the complex. Though she couldn't tell if it was there to keep the slaves in or the jungle predators out. Most likely a bit of both. They were led through a gate and up the path to the central building. A sort of longhouse made of wood and packed clay. Compared to the other dwellings it was much grander. Come, said the cloaked stallion, the master awaits. The inside of the hut was much more opulent looking than the outside. The floor and walls had been dressed with planks of rich redwood. Finely sanded and lacquered and then buffed to a shine. The room was filled with all sorts of mismatched items and riches. Expensive paintings hung on the walls next to painted masks that seemed to stare at anyone who entered. A chest full of coin and gems sat in the far corner next to a desk of dark wood. There were statues of gold, bundles of silks. A cabinet of dusty tomes stood against the left wall, next to a boiling cauldron. A shelf of strange and mystical items hung above it. All in all, the inside was like a king's treasury, mixed with a witch doctor's sanctum. And at the end of the room, in the center, was a large ornate chair. The figure who sat in the chair was corpulent in the extreme. He was a giant anthropomorphic hippopotamus. He had mottled brown skin and piercing, steel-grey eyes under a heavy brow. His thick heavy lips curled in a cruel smile around two protruding tusks, one of which was plated in gold. He was smoking a thick cigar that filled the room with its acrid stink. He was dressed in a well-tailored, bone-colored suit that could barely contain his rotund frame, and his face was painted to resemble a death's head. If anything, he looked like an odd mix between a businessman and a voodoo doctor. Slowly he stood, the chair creaking slightly as he got to his feet. He was tall, taller than most minotaur. Any other so corpulent would have looked comical. But he only radiated fierceness. "Welcome to your new lives," he said in a deep baritone, as he spread his arms theatrically. "I am known far and wide as Moha, but to you, I am simply, Master. The lands around us and those that live on them belong to me. And now, so do you. And one day soon, all of Zebrica will belong to me. To make that goal a reality, I require workers. You will be those workers. If you obey, your lives will be meaningful, even relatively comfortable. If you show true dedication, you may even be rewarded. Perhaps even lifted from slaves to followers. For I am generous to those who are loyal to my vision. However, should you choose to disrespect me, or worse, actively resist me, all you will know is pain. For I am as generous with my punishments as I am with my rewards." As he spoke, two masked guards dragged in a whimpering stallion. "Take Zanji here, such a dedicated worker, or so I believed. Turns out Zanji thought he could get away with stealing what belongs to me. G Great One, Master, please, it was just a mistake." "Yes, it was. But the mistake was mine," he said as he took a long draw of his cigar. "I made the mistake of thinking you could be trusted. Made the mistake of believing you had learned your lesson after the first time. Remember what I told you last time, Zanji? Those who make a mistake twice don't get to make a third. Wait, no. No, Master, please. Lessons must be taught, and I always, keep my word. Take him to the pit." No, please," he screamed as they dragged him out. "Come, you will all witness what happens to those who repeatedly break the rules," Weijio said as he followed after the guards and the screaming stallion. They were led back outside, to the edge of the compound. Here was a small arena of sorts, with a deep pit at its center roughly 30 foot long and wide, and around 12 deep. The top edges were all lined with sharpened stakes, pointing downwards, to make sure that whatever was in the pit, stayed in the pit. On the far side was a large iron gate. "Now watch, and do not look away. If you look away you shall be thrown in as well." Weijio addressed the group. "Put him in." "Master, no. Mercy!" the stallion screamed as they threw him into the pit. He landed on the muddy ground with a wet thud. The group did not dare look away as the iron gate began to open, and from the darkness beyond something emerged with the clicking of many legs. An enormous centipede emerged from the gate. Its dark, red-brown body easily 15 feet long. Its many skittering legs were a mustard yellow color. It moved, quick as lightning, heading directly for the stallion, who was trying desperately to climb up the side of the pit to no avail. In seconds the centipede was upon him. He barely had time to blink before it latched onto him with its giant front pincers and many legs. And then it began to feast. The horrid screams were audible across the entire compound for a long time, because the giant monster didn't bother killing its victim. Its voracious appetite drove it to simply eating its meals alive. Several of the group got to experience their own meager meal of the day for a second time, in reverse. At least there was no punishment for throwing up. Now you know the price of disobedience. Everyone is allowed one mistake, but only one. So tread lightly, my new servants. The guards led them away from the pit. Behind them the crunchy sound of bones being stripped clean were still audible. Now it is time for you all to receive my mark. You should feel honored, for it will one day be a symbol of great power. To the stables. The stables were very much like the ones at the slave auction. Consisting of several pens, and a room with a forge for heating branding irons. When her turn finally came, Trixie tried to be strong, she tried not to scream. She really did. But the simple truth was that she didn't handle pain very well. Sure, she had her fair share of bumps and bruises, she even broke her foreleg once when she was little, and that had hurt a lot. But that was nothing compared to this. This was beyond mere pain. As the hot branding iron touched her cutie mark, it felt as if not just her poor flank, but her very soul was being burned. The pain was so intense she felt like she would vomit, again. The smell of her own blistering flesh was like a punch in the snout. She felt lightheaded, her vision blurred. And then, merciful unconsciousness took her away from the pain. She awoke with a sour taste in her mouth, and feeling sore all over. There was a dull throb in her flank. Memories of the pain came flushing back and she started to hyperventilate briefly, fighting to get her heartbeat back under control. She didn't dare look back. She didn't want to see the scars that now desecrated her cutie mark. She began to whimper, and then sob. "Shhh," said a gentle voice beside her. "It's gonna be okay. I know this is hard right now, but you will be okay." "How can Trixie possibly be okay?" she wailed. "Trixie has been violated." A gentle hoof stroked her back while she cried. Normally, Trixie would have been mortified to weep in front of a stranger, but she was emotionally drained and beyond caring at this point. She needed some relief after everything she had endured the past 2 weeks. Eventually she calmed down, thanks in part to the gentle hoof rubbing her back and withers. She stared at the unfamiliar walls of wood and sandstone. "What time is it?" she croaked. Her throat felt very raw. "It's almost midnight. You've been unconscious for a few hours. Here, drink this," said the gentle voice as a cup made from one half of a coconut was pushed into view. Trixie took it with shaky hooves and drank. It was just water, but to her parched tongue and throat it was the best water she ever had. She finally looked at the owner of the voice as she whispered her thanks. Said owner turned out to be a young zebra mare. She had soft, delicate features, light grey stripes with a hint of blue to them, and a long faux hawk mane of jet black that hung to one side. She had a small but kind smile, and aquamarine-colored eyes that showed both sadness and compassion. A single ear hoop hung from her left ear. "Who are you?" "A slave. Like you. They call me Maji." "What's your name?" "Trixie." "Hello Trixie. I know you must have many questions. Feel free to ask them. I will answer if I can. Is there any more water?" Maji shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, but there is only a limited supply of fresh water, so everything is strictly rationed. I gave you some of mine because it would be cruel to make you wait until morning when the daily rations are distributed." Trixie nodded in understanding, feeling a twinge of guilt for having taken what meager supplies Maji had without a second thought. Her guilt must have shown on her face, or Maji was simple very perceptive because when she looked at her she said, "It's all right. You needed it more than me right now." Trixie gave her the best grateful smile she could muster under the circumstances. "Where are we?" "These are the servants' quarters. Though calling them that might be too generous. It's little more than a cell block. But if we behave we are at least afforded some privacy. And some basic comforts like clean bedding. Trixie tried to sit up, but the pain shooting through her flank made her hiss and lie back down. Best lie still for now. I applied some ointment to help speed up the healing, but you will be sore for some time. Trixie gulped. Is it bad? No worse than any of the others here. Maji said. Trixie still didn't dare look back. She kept her eyes straight in front of her. She would not accept this. She would not simply become a meek subservient mare. She refused to accept that this was her fate. She was Trixie, proud daughter of House Lulamoon. Her train of thought screeched to a halt. What did that matter anymore? Out here, no Ponei cared who she was or where she came from. She was just a piece of meat to these pigs. Maybe she should just resign herself to her fate? Maybe that would make things easier for her. She pushed that feeling down with force. She had to stay strong. She had to believe help was coming. Surely Aaron would come for her. He promised. But it had been nearly 2 weeks, and she had seen no sign of him. What if he really was dead? What if she was really alone? She bit her lower lip, hard. The pain helped her to focus. She had been alone before, for a long time. She would survive this, and she would find a way to escape and look for him. The great and determined Trixie would persevere. She swallowed and looked back at her own flank. Ugly white-red scars covered her left cutie mark. The fur around it had blackened edges from where it had been burned away. The largest scar in the center formed a strange symbol she didn't recognize. Around it was a circle of small runes. She recognized some from a magic textbook she once read. Everything was covered in a thin layer of greasy ointment. As she stared at her defaced cutie mark, she swore she would make the master pay. After letting her recover for the first day at the compound, they put her to work. Mostly doing menial labor. Cleaning rooms. Bringing around food, washing dishes. Any old boring job you could think of. After 2 days, once she was fully recovered from her ordeal, they took her into the jungle. As it turned out, there was a quarry not far from the main compound. Most of the slaves were put to work there. Working in small groups to extract stone, and occasionally precious gems or other valuable materials they would unearth. They would work from just after sunrise, when they were given their daily ration of water and food, till 4 in the afternoon. After which they were allowed some small measure of personal time, before being locked up in the compound for the night. Maji was by her side most of the time, showing her the ropes. The work was hard, mind-numbing and repetitive, making the days blur together. The group she was assigned to was a diverse lot. There was Windy Sails, a former Navy Pegasus, taken from a ship much like Trixie. Copper Leaf, a big earth pony with a copper-colored coat who used to work as a foreman in construction. He had come all the way to Zeebrugge to work on some project. One night after work he went out drinking in the wrong neighborhood. Passed out after 1 too many glasses of fire water, and woke up in chains. Then there was Kijani, a zebra mare from a nearby farming community, whose parents made the mistake of refusing to pay tribute to Weijio. As penance for their actions they took her. Last among their group was Gordon, a salty old griffin with only 1 wing. How he lost the other one was a mystery, since he refused to speak of it. But there was wild speculation among the slaves. And then there was Maji herself, who was also rather tight-lipped about her past. All she would say was that she originally grew up in Kipajikito, the largest city in Zeebrugge where Queen Mariani resides. Pick up the pace, newbie. Quit daydreaming, Gordon huffed in that gruff voice of his as he lifted another stone into their assigned cart. Trixie was not daydreaming. She grunted back as she levitated her own stone into the cart. You keep looking at the edge of the jungle as if expecting to see something. You've been doing that for the last 3 days, give it a rest. Kijani said. Trixie is waiting for her cold friend to come and help us get out of here. Hate to break it to you, sweetheart, Copper Leaf grunted as he dropped his stone in the cart, but no Ponei is coming for us. Me and Gord, we've been here for almost 2 years. Windy has been here a year and a half, and Kijani a year. So stop deluding yourself and accept this simple truth. You're never getting out of here. We're all going to spend the rest of our lives in this miserable jungle. Hungry, thirsty, and lifting rocks. Trixie won't accept that. Help will come. No, it won't. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. Dude, you don't have to be so harsh about it, said Windy. Hey, the sooner she gets it through her head, the less likely she is to do something stupid and get herself, and possibly us, in trouble. Hush, all of you. Maji said, give the poor thing some time to adapt. You know how hard it was for yourselves. That's exactly why I'm being blunt. Best to rip off the band-aid in one go. Hey! Enough talking, get back to work. Bellowed a guard, brandishing a whip. Every pony got back to work quietly, but Trixie kept stealing glances at the jungle all the same. Up in the bushes of the tree line, something stirred. Later that evening, Trixie collapsed onto the pile of rags that served as her bed. Her muscles ached from walking, and she had a slight headache from lifting rocks with her magic all day. Is this how my life will be from now? The same thing every day. I did not want to say it earlier, but I fear so, said Maji as she sat down on her own rag pile bed in the cell they shared. Unless something changes, it may be all we have left. Why do we dig up all that stone in the first place? I'm not sure. Rumors say the master plans to build a great fort or castle or something like it to be the seat of his power. A place that can rival the royal palace. How do you stand it? The same thing day after day with no end in sight? Trixie asked. Her voice quiet. Maji shrugged her shoulders lightly. I try to keep hope. That gets me through the day. So should you. Trixie tried, but... Trixie. I'm at the end of my rope. She felt so tired and miserable. She just wanted to curl up and cry, and slowly fade into nothing. She stared through the tiny, barred window, at the moon over the jungle. Her shoulders slumped. Something dropped from the rafters into her bed. She yelped and jumped off her pile of rags. Maji also jumped to her hooves, the hairs on her back standing on end almost like a cat. What is it? Is it a spider? Maji breathed, looking for something heavy to smash whatever it was. But all they had on hoof was the bucket to relieve themselves in during the night. Something stirred amidst the rags. Slowly crawling out into the thin beam of moonlight coming from the window. Trixie's eyes went wide and her breath caught in her throat. For the tiny shape was familiar. Herb. A few hundred yards off the coast of Pearl Cove, a small fishing boat bobbed on the waves in the evening sun. A couple of fishing lines hanging off the side, and a small dragnet hung out the back. On deck 2 young zebra went about their work. The younger of the pair was digging through a little cooler on the aft deck. Hey, Zully? Where be that bunch of berries? I don't know. His brother replied casually. The younger approached his sibling with narrowed eyes. Open your mouth, he said to Zully, slowly closing the distance between them. What for, Zammy? Zully asked, all innocence. You know why? Zammy said whilst glaring daggers at him, his suspicions rising with every step closer he gets. Don't know what you mean, his brother said coyly before sticking his tongue out at his brother, revealing a discolored blue stain on it. I knew it. You greedy warthog. I was saving those. Zam yelled as he tried to tackle his brother. I know, and they were seriously good, he said, licking his chops before colliding with his peeved brother. The two tussled for a time, one laughing at the other cursing the other one. Boys! A voice bellowed from the cabin. Out came an older zebra with a pot belly, wearing a fishing hat and lure vest. Quit that grab flankery before I clap your sorry hides over the side, you hearing me? He started it, uncle. Zam said, giving his grinning brother a shove off of him. I will finish it, the old fisherman began before all three of them were jolted and thrown off their hooves as the boat suddenly lurched back. What was that? Zuli said shakily. Their uncle was the first to get back on his hooves, replacing his hat on his head. A noise from the back of the ship caught his attention, and he rushed over. His suspicions proved right as he could see the lines straining when he arrived. We catch something? Zam asked, coming to his uncle's side. His fear momentarily forgotten as his eyes widened in wonder at what must have rocked their little ship. Uncle Zadary had fished these waters for years with his father. Even though many stayed out of them these days due to the rising slave trade and piracy. Fortunately they seemed to mostly leave the local fishing boats alone. So long as they paid their tithe. Zadary fancied himself a capable zebra. The waters here were shallow and the fishing was decent with no real big dangers. The biggest creature around here being a reef shark. This however was new to him. The lines held taut as he peered down into the water, but it was too deep to see anything yet. As he reached over to the crank to bring whatever this was to the surface, another jolt found him once again hatless and on his back as his ship was being dragged backwards through the water. By the circle. What's happening? Screeched one of the boys as the stern began to dip, the water foaming and churning. After a moment Zadary sprang up, pulling out a small machete he kept for hacking off fish heads. He began to swing at the net lines, desperately trying to sever them to keep his boat from going under. Swinging away over and over again, he cursed himself, both for buying a sturdy new net as well as for having to destroy it so soon. With a thwack one line finally snapped and swung loose, disappearing under the waves. But the other still held tight, and whatever it was holding continued to pull them closer to shore. It suddenly changed direction, heading towards the port less than half a mile to the north. As it did the boat began tilting sideways precariously. His nephews screamed and tried to climb on top of the cabin, while Zadary, already up to his withers in sea water, still moved forward. He held the machete in his mouth as he pulled himself across the submerged stern. That's when he saw it. It was big, a massive leviathan that seemed to be made up of some bizarre amalgamation of strands of kelp, and great slabs of coral reef, complete with a half-sunken ship embedded in it. It didn't swim so much as stride across the seabed on a number of massive legs. Much like a crustacean. It was when the top of its body suddenly twisted nearly 180 degrees to reveal a pair of giant, glowing eyes that pierced the murky water, and his very soul, that Zadary lost his grip on his blade. His mouth went slack in horror, and the machete tumbled over the side. Something shot out from the creature's form, piercing through the water, straight at him. Two pairs of hooves grabbed him, pulling him back in the nick of time as tendrils snaked their way across the boat's stern, biting into the wood like the sharpest of carpentering tools. They moved so blindingly swift he never got a good look at what they actually were. The wood itself was shredded as if it were made of soft cheese. One tendril found purchase on the remaining net line and severed it cleanly. The rope snapped like a whip as it zipped underwater and the little fishing boat lurched once again as it came free. The tendrils then receded back down into the water below. The three zebra lay there, stunned. Too terrified to move lest the thing might come back. They could still see its dark form moving through the increasingly shallow waters. A stark dark contrast against the yellow-white sands. And it was headed straight for the town of Coral Cove.